What's up, Marvel fans? We're the Hills Maniacs, and today, to get ready for the third Ant-Man movie coming out, we're going to be reviewing the first in the trilogy of Ant-Man movies, Ant-Man. Basically, what we're doing is going back and rewatching each of the first two Ant-Man movies to get ready for the third one, which, of course, will be featuring Kang the Conqueror and all that stuff. It comes out on February 17th. We will be reviewing that one on this channel as well, so keep an eye out for that. But let's get started on this one. So what did you think of the first Ant-Man movie, like back from when it first came out to seeing it again this time around, like rewatching it and everything else?
It's still not one of my favorites. That's what I've learned from rewatching Ant-Man.
Why is that?
Well, no, it's just, I mean, I get it's kind of a new concept for the movies. You know, we saw the Iron Mans and Captain Americas, Thor, Hulk, Avengers, whatever, and then you introduce kind of this new character where he accesses the quantum realm and he can shrink and grow and all this other stuff. It's a cool concept. I just think, I don't know if it was the acting or just the way the movie was directed or what, but I feel like, and it kind of for me felt a lot like the Thor movies have recently been, where they focus more on trying to be funny rather than being a serious Marvel movie. And I think that's why I liked, like, you know, Winter Soldier is one of my favorite Marvel movies. And I think it's because it's a serious movie that has a serious plot, whereas like Ant-Man's kind of like, you know, you get especially the scenes with Louise, where he retells these stories and stuff, and he's just all over the place, and he's like, oh, I told this guy, and they told me, and then he told him, oh, and by the way, we have the thing, and just goes all over the place. You know, and then even Scott Lang cracking jokes occasionally, and just the whole Baskin Robbins thing. I mean, yeah, it's a funny movie, and it's funny when it needs to be, but I don't like that for Marvel. I don't think it needs comedy in the MCU.
See, I thought it had the right amount of comedy because it didn't feel like it was overwhelming. Like if you look at Thor: Love and Thunder and stuff, like to make the most recent comparison and stuff with the movie that had a lot of comedy in it, that had like nothing but comedy pretty much. I don't think there was really a serious moment in that movie, or a moment that we were supposed to take seriously, because it was meant to be just funny for some reason. That kind of ruined the movie for a lot of people.
That's how I felt with Ant-Man.
And that's kind of how Phase 4 of the MCU felt a lot too. But going back, rewatching this one, which I think was the start of Phase 3 or the end of Phase 2 or whatever, because it came out after Age of Ultron, I guess, and it takes place like right after that movie as well. I think they balanced it out perfectly, because Scott Lang is meant to be like sort of an idiot type character. Like, he doesn't really understand what's going on, and he's learning what all this stuff is, just like we are. Like, he's just a thief that gets arrested and gets caught a lot.
I understand that, but yeah. I think you can do the plot and still have it be where he messes up, and you make it kind of like funny that he's messing up what he's doing, without having all the extra comedy purposely thrown in there.
I thought
just for whatever reason.
It didn't take me out of the movie. I mean, I enjoyed the stuff like with Louise, just the way he tells all the stories and stuff. Even in the second movie, you see that too. We'll probably talk about that more next week in our review of Ant-Man and the Wasp. But I just think that was a nice little bit of comedy. They didn't go too over with, like, too much. They didn't have too much comedy in it where it took me out of the movie. I thought it was a nice balance of the seriousness and the hilarity. You know, like even the villain, Darren Cross, like every time he was on the screen, there wasn't really any comedy. There was all this tenseness. Like, you knew something was going to happen. You knew he's probably going to go crazy by the end of the movie. It reminded me of like Obadiah Stane from the first Iron Man movie, you know, because that's essentially who he is. He works for Hank Pym. Hank Pym's his mentor, but then he also tries to, like, he wants to take over Hank Pym's empire essentially, and thinks he can create the Pym particles better than Hank Pym could, and figure it all out and stuff like that. But when those moments are on the screen and stuff, there's not any really comedy to it. Even when Scott Lang is in the room with them, or they're fighting or whatever, there's not really any uh, comedy. There's just these tense moments and stuff.
Well, that's how the whole movie should have been. It shouldn't have been. You don't need that whole thing with Louise. You don't need him even in this movie. You could just have Scott have a best friend. Like,
well,
you
they
don't
need some kind of comic relief.
You don't need comedy. This is a Marvel movie. You look at how good Winter Soldier was. There wasn't barely any. If there was any comedy, it wasn't intentionally thrown in all the time. You know, so it was. That's why it's one of my favorites. I think because it was a series and it focused on the plot. It focused on making sure everything made sense. It focused on continuing from where the last Captain America movie and the Avengers and stuff all left off, without going against continuity. This being the introduction to Ant-Man, where it had nothing to play off of. They had that kind of free range that they could just have it be whatever they wanted. And I think another issue for me was the whole idea of quantum tech and the quantum realm and how it works, because I feel that they've so contradicted themselves so many times in the MCU with how the quantum realm truly functions. And it all started with what they say in this one, because they say that time and space works differently in the quantum realm, which is fine. But then when you compare that to like Endgame, when they're using the quantum realm to time travel and go through the thing, when you go back to say 2012 for the events of Avengers, you shouldn't be able to know when 2012 is when you're in the quantum realm.
I know.
Because time and space works differently. And then, people have brought up, and we'll get more into this next week when we talk about Ant-Man and the Wasp, but we get Janet Van Dyne in the second one, so spoiler for that one. But she comes back and she's aged. Well, a lot of people have said, how do you age if time and space work differently in the quantum realm? You know what I mean? So it's just, this whole thing is just kind of so convoluted that I don't even think the creators of the movies really know what they're trying to accomplish with it. They just kind of change it to fit whatever need they need at that present time. And even this one with Quantumania, when it comes out, just based off the trailers, the fact that like they're sending a signal down to the quantum realm, and Janet Van Dyne gets upset about it, and she's like, oh, turn it off, because she's scared because she knows something's down there. Well, how can something live down there if this whole realm is like this different thing? And then like, how do you manipulate the quantum realm to use it for your benefit? And so it's just this whole convoluted thing, and it's kind of, for me, I kind of compare the quantum realm itself to Multiverse of Madness, the movie, just because there's so many different aspects to it that you have to try to piece together from throughout what we know is canon in the MCU, that it just eventually it's gonna end up being like, how does that work?
Right, and I think that was really the only problem I had with this movie was, like you said, the quantum realm doesn't really make any sense, because they explain in this, if they shrink down too far, they'll end up in the quantum realm. Well, first of all, how does Hank Pym know that? He's never been there.
Right.
He doesn't know there's like a city and all that stuff down there like we see in Quantumania trailers and stuff.
Right.
So how does he know anything about the quantum realm? And also, if you have to shrink really far to get there, how do you direct exactly where you're going to go in the quantum realm?
Right.
And then because then later on you see they can just make a portal to it and they go there, and even in Endgame and everything else, it's like, how do you make a portal there if you have to shrink?
Right.
Like, do you need the portal if you could just shrink everybody and then you end up...
then it ends up being like where it's just like, oh, I'll walk there. Like that's basically what it's like.
That was maybe the only problem I had with this movie. Some things I liked about it was how I don't know how Marvel pulled this off. I know it's like CGI or whatever, but I like how they made everything in the world look bigger. Like when Scott was shrunk down, or Darren Cross was shrunk. Everybody that wore used the Hank Pym tech and stuff like that. How they made the world look bigger when they were shrunk down. I thought that was kind of impressive.
Right. And
it was something unique we haven't seen in the MCU before. Before that moment, at least. Like, we've seen that now, obviously, after because we've been through the MCU so much. But rewatch it when you watch this the first time, it's kind of impressive. It's like it's cool to see like.
Yeah.
He's in the bathtub or whatever when he shrinks down
Right.
the first time, and you see like now the drops of water are huge and the floor is bigger than it was. The tub is
Right.
just like a big prison essentially. I thought that was really cool how they pulled that off and changed the perspective of like what the world looks like when you're really tiny.
Well, I like that you brought up about the shrinking and everything else, because that's another thing that for me just never really worked for these movies. I mean, I like the idea of being able to shrink, and I do like that they even like kind of muffle the sound. You know, when Louise
When
is
everything's
talking,
bigger,
looking
yeah.
for Scott, and Scott's tiny in the bathtub,
can't hear
and then
him.
he
Yeah,
can't.
right.
It's all like muffled, you know. But for me, it's just that whole concept of shrinking something, because they even say that when Scott shrinks, he weighs the same, but he now has the ability to move faster because he's smaller, you know. But he
Right,
still
like in
weighs
hands,
the same.
basically.
So they said he's
Right.
the bullet with the punch of a tank, or however they described it. So if something shrinks and it still weighs the same, then whenever, like, we see it when he falls out of the bathtub, Scott cracks the tile on the floor because he's still like, you know,
He still weighs the same.
the
He
weight
just-
he
yeah.
was, so he cracks the floor. But then later on, we don't see that kind of stuff. Like, he's just walking around in like vents and stuff, and just like there's just all this stuff that's happening. Or like even when he's fighting against Darren Cross, and they land on the train set in his house, in Kathy's bedroom, they don't like shatter the table right when they land on it. Like, both of them should have shattered it, because it's a grown man standing on this table. It should have broke.
Right. Well,
You know, or even when they throw the trains and stuff at each other, like, they shouldn't, like, they should just snap basically, because they're hitting a full grown adult that's this big. Like,
and
yeah,
the train shouldn't weigh that much
right,
either, where it
and
could bust
yeah.
through the house, I guess. But
right.
I guess that's because it got bigger.
But then
yeah.
even once they grow, you know, we see like the Thomas the Tank Engine toy grows and shatters through the house and stuff. It shouldn't be that heavy to where it would shatter the.
They should be able to still pick it
yeah,
up. I
you
guess.
should still be
Yeah.
able to pick it up. It's just really giant, because it should still weigh the same. I think it would have worked a lot better for me. I think if you either don't focus on the quantum realm in Endgame, or even Ant-Man and the Wasp, and you just kind of have it be like an Ant-Man thing, and that's it.
Like,
or-
they're the only ones that
or-
explore
yeah,
it 'cause
or
they know
B,
about it.
You don't explain how the quantum realm works, and you leave that open for speculation going into Endgame, so that we know, like, oh, they could, since we don't really know how it works, they can then use it to time travel. But
Or
the
they
fact
explore
that
it or what, yeah.
you explain how the quantum realm works, and then later on in another movie in the same franchise, you basically contradict what you just said. You know, I think it would have worked better had they just been like, okay, this is an Ant-Man thing. Nobody else uses the quantum realm. Because up until then, Tony Stark didn't use the quantum realm. He never studied, like, quantum mechanics or quantum physics or anything. Banner never did any of that. I mean, they might have mentioned it at one point, but they weren't experts
Why
in
don't
it.
they know about it?
So just
You know,
leave
kind of
it
thing.
leave it for a Scott Lang and Hank Pym situation. You know, just leave it for them. Let them travel through the quantum realm to go back in time to find the Infinity Stones, instead of everybody working together to try to figure out if you can make this time machine to go back and you know, because basically Scott had to work with Bruce Banner to create this time machine so that they could travel through the quantum realm. You really didn't need any of them involved with that process. You could have left this as an Ant-Man thing, because everybody had their own sort of thing. You know, like the Asgard stuff. You never saw like Captain America getting involved in
Going
Asgard
Asgard,
business. You
yeah.
know, because that was a Thor problem.
Right.
That was
Well, that's true.
Thor's stuff. So anything that has to do with the quantum realm should be Ant-Man or Scott Lang or Hank Pym or Hope or whoever. But leave it for the Ant-Man stuff. You don't need to incorporate it into the overall. I mean, you look at Moon Knight. Moon Knight was part of the MCU without incorporating everything else. So they could have did that with Ant-Man and just had it I think they kind of got lazy with that aspect of Endgame when they just kind of, oh, we have the quantum realm, so we'll just kind of use that to explain time travel. Like, I think this
Yeah.
movie would have worked better had you not explained how it worked.
See, I think like I mean, we didn't really see the full quantum realm necessarily in this movie, but him explaining that like that's what happens when you shrink, it's kind of like, well, I mean, like I said earlier, how does he know that for sure? You know, but like, yeah, I guess they could have left that for further explanation down the road, or just have it be an Ant-Man thing,
Yeah.
like you said.
Or just leave it up for interpretation from us. You know, based off of
Yeah.
what we think, you know, if we read the comics or whatever, just leave it open for us to guess how the quantum realm works. Make it a mystery for us to then want to keep rewatching the Ant-Man stuff to figure out how it works. And then once you watch Endgame, you're like, oh, okay, you can travel through time. Cool. You know, because you don't know that time works differently in the quantum realm unless they tell you that. And since they told us that, then you go into Endgame and it's like, well, if time works differently, how do you know
How
where
does
you're
that
going?
work? Yeah.
You know, so I think they kind of shot themselves in the foot, so to speak, when they put that line in this movie. And I don't know if maybe at that time they probably didn't know they were going to use this for Endgame. Down the line, they probably just figured they needed the quantum realm to be introduced.
Right.
So I guess they just kind of threw that in, but they do that a lot in older previous, you know, MCU movies, and then later on it kind of contradicts what happens. But I think you could have just left out how the quantum realm works and left it open for us.
Something I did like about this movie though was kind of how they showed the shared history between Hank Pym and like the people that formed Shield essentially. So they showed Peggy Carter, Howard Stark was there, some other guy whose name I don't know who was kind of part of this movie as well. He ends up like working with Darren Cross or whatever.
Yeah, I forget what his name is.
I can't remember if there was anybody else involved in it, but Hank Pym blamed Howard Stark for like stealing his tech and that kind of stuff. So you see a little bit of a rift there and show how much Howard Stark really didn't care about other people, which is kind of what we learn about Howard Stark from Tony and everything else throughout the MCU. I kind of like that they showed that shared history that Hank Pym was like part of the original Shield and stuff before other people took over, and then of course Hydra invaded and everything else. So it kind of shows that like maybe he shared his ideas with Howard Stark, and that's how they're both these brilliant scientists. But then he took it and hid it from the world because he thought people were trying to steal his technology, which makes sense. He stopped being Ant-Man and hid the suit from the world and didn't let anybody else use it, and that's why he thinks
because he knew it was dangerous.
Right, and that's why he thinks it's a big deal with Darren Cross trying to like recreate that serum and all that stuff to recreate the Ant-Man suits and stuff into the Yellow Jacket suits. But I like that all kind of ties back to like the origins of Shield and the early MCU before, like, obviously it's after Captain America and stuff. And Peggy Carter's a lot older when they had this happen, but you see the scene where they de-aged everybody kind of. And I also like that they kind of. They found a way to tie it in with the larger MCU as well, because there's a scene where Scott is sent to what they don't realize is the new Avengers facility following Age of Ultron. Hank just thinks it's an old building that Howard Stark used to own, and they need this one part for whatever machine they're building. And I like that they had him try to invade there, and then of course like Falcon is there guarding the Avengers facility. They couldn't get every Avenger in there, but I liked that Anthony Mackie was in it. So I thought that was cool as well, because it's not just like its own standalone movie where they're not going to reference the other stuff that has happened. They continued with their trend of keeping everything connected to the larger MCU. And that was kind of one of my favorite scenes in the movie as well, his battle with Sam Wilson and stuff, like on the roof and everything. Sam's like embarrassed at the end when Scott beats him because he's like, please don't tell Cap about this or something, you know. I thought that made for a funny moment, and it also kind of tied everything together.
It set up for Civil War.
And it set up for Captain America Civil War, exactly, where Sam Wilson remembers this fight and brings it up with Cap that we could use this guy on our team, which we see in Captain America Civil War. So they did a nice tie-in there without ruining, like, they didn't take the attention away from it being an Ant-Man movie, kind of like, you know, if you compare it to like Spider-Man Homecoming and stuff, where it was supposed to be about Spider-Man, but it mainly felt like Tony Stark was in the movie a little too much. I feel like it was more about him, sort of thing, and like where Peter fits in with the Avengers and stuff. But this one did a nice job of like weaving Scott Lang into the Avengers universe without making it about the Avengers. It kept it focused on him, because that was only maybe about like a 10-minute scene or something where he's fighting with Falcon and stuff. But I still thought it was a cool way that they managed to integrate all that into the larger MCU. And overall, I'd honestly say this was almost a perfect movie, just in terms of, at least for like an origin story in the MCU. If you look at a lot of the other like origin stories and stuff, a lot of them are kind of like, whatever. It's not necessarily that great of a movie. But like this one, I mean, I thought the acting was great, especially the stuff with Hope and Hank. Like Hank Pym and his daughter Hope Van Dyne. Just the acting there, the emotion between the two of them, because Hank's wife, Janet, ended up, well, like you said earlier, she ended up in the quantum realm because she had to shrink down to stop this one missile, and he thought she was dead all these years, and then he kind of lied to Hope when she was younger and sent her off to boarding school and stuff because he couldn't face the reality of, like, it was basically his fault that her mother died. And you get that emotion in their acting in the scene where he finally tells her what's going on, and you see the crying from like Evangeline Lilly and everybody. I just feel like they all did really well, at least with the acting, better than some of the other movies I've seen in the MCU and stuff. Because you felt how all the characters are. Scott Lang is basically like a buffoon kind of thing, and that's where the comedy, like we said, came into play. That's who he is as a character. That's who Paul Rudd is as an actor as well. He's that kind of funny guy, So I felt like he was perfectly cast for that role as well as Scott Lang. And all the actors in this really, I feel like they were spot on. I mean, they put on a good performance, I'd say. I wasn't really like, oh, that guy sucks as an actor. I don't know why they cast him, etc. I thought they all fit in really well, and they worked well together. From what I've seen, I've never seen if anybody had like any beef with each other on set or anything like that. So I feel like they got along great, and you even see that chemistry in the second movies as well, and even the third one and stuff. From what we've seen in the trailers and everything, I think the casting was really well, and the acting and everything else. And if I was going to give this a rating, I'd almost say 4.5 out of 5, just because I didn't see really any flaws with this movie. Maybe the explanation of the quantum realm, but that's about it. Comparing this to like the second Ant-Man movie, that movie I felt a little bit less of. Like it wasn't that important of a movie. I feel it was just kind of a filler to get us to Endgame and stuff. But this one, I felt like it was alright for an origin story, and it explained everything the way it needed to, and introduced us to these new characters, and wove them into the MCU nicely. I felt like. What did you think?
I mean, it was a good way to introduce these characters, and every character has to have an origin story, so that it's not just hi, I'm here. Like
I've been here the whole time.
There has to be. We had Captain America, Thor, Hulk, Iron Man, all of them. Then we got the Black Widow movie, which wasn't really an origin, but it's still kind of. And then even with the Disney Plus shows introducing new characters, but for me, it didn't work as the comedy type of thing that it was being, and it you didn't need all of that. You could have had an Ant-Man movie and had more serious things than trying to focus on like his ex-wife being with a cop who's tracking him down, who ends up trying to, in the end, ends up helping him sort of get out of prison. And any of the stuff with Louise, you could have left all that stuff out, where he's telling stories and all kinds of other stuff. I understand what they're trying to get at, is that Hank is this, or Scott is this, like, silly, whatever, and his friends aren't that intelligent, but they still end up getting the job done, but you could have just had that, either be less of it and focus more on Scott and his training to be Ant-Man, or even the fight against Darren Cross at the end, or just whatever, but just leave that out. I've said this before when we've reviewed other Marvel movies that have comedy in them. I don't like it when they do that, because that's not what a superhero movie is meant to be. I don't go to the theaters to watch a comedy. I go to watch a superhero movie. It's not supposed to be funny. This whole thing is just, for me, it's too confusing to be a serious movie and to be a perfect movie. I don't think there is a perfect movie in the MCU. Every movie has its flaws, but I don't. You said you'd give it a 4. I'd probably give it like a 2.5.
Jeez.
On the thing, because it's
that
not.
bad.
Hey, on a scale
It's
of
better than Eternals.
1 to 5, Eternals is a
It's
0.
better than
so-
Thor: The Dark World.
But there are some that are lower than a 2.5. I'll go to 3 just to kind of go halfway. But 2.5 to 3 is where I would rank Ant-Man. I haven't been a fan of Ant-Man throughout these things, and then even in the other movies and stuff he's in, it's like, woo, Scott Lang's here, like, woo, you know. I mean, I get he can do a lot and his character's cool, but it's not a character that I really cared about.
But let us know what you guys think down in the comments section. Did you enjoy this movie when you first saw it? If you've rewatched it, what did you think about it the second or third time around? How would you compare it to like all the other movies in the MCU? And also be sure to like this video and subscribe for more. We're going to be talking about Ant-Man and the Wasp next week. Also on Friday, and then the following week we'll talk about Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania when that comes out in theaters. So keep an eye out for all of that. Thank you for watching the video, everyone.
Remember, leave the scumbaggery at home, and we'll see you guys in the next one.
Bye
Bye,
everybody.
guys.